My name is Erika Di Stefano. I am Quality and DBS Manager for Hydro Building System Italy, and since few weeks I am the Remelt Manager in Atessa plant. I am an ambassador in HBS Women's Network, honestly because I believe that we have the moral duty to improve our society, also in our work environment. And we need to leave to the future generation, our daughter, our granddaughters, a fairer and more inclusive world. What I think about the statement, women can work in plants because it's too hard and physical. Physical strength depends on the person. We have to create a working environment that reduces the difference. For example, through an ergonomic workstation, which improves the work of women and men too. I believe that the only real limit we can have is what is in the mind, because we have the same head, the same hands, the same passion, and all these things haven't a gender, but depend only on the person. What I think about having a target for female workers in Hydro. Have you ever seen the graph of the force that a press applies? At the beginning of extrusion, the press must apply the maximum force as a peak to fight the opposing frictions. Having a target for work of women is similar. It's the effort we must make to have a balance necessary to have equity in work and society. I would like to reach my goals as the result of my hard work, like a man. I don't want favoritism, I don't ask for simplification, but equal opportunities, yes. Same economic rewards, same career opportunities, no more but not less. My wish for the future is to don't speak more about women and men difference condition, because we reached the same condition. Thank you for listening to me. Let's push for more diversity and inclusion in Hydro.